They are there for your safety. We're reminded before every takeoff, the courtesy and beverage are always a nice bonus. But maybe it's because most flight attendants are so predictably professional that today's episode in Dallas was so startling. It began when a member of the American Airlines cabin crew got on the intercom, mentioned her employer's recent bankruptcy filing, and then went on a rant so terrifying some passengers felt the need to get physical. Here's ABC's Pierre Thomas.
This blood-curdling scream is what scared the hell out of passengers and made the children aboard American Airlines Flight 2332 cry.
Our flight attendant on Flight 223 has gone nuts.
It was just after 8 a.m. this morning, and the plane was making its way toward the runway at the Dallas airport bound for Chicago. Then the bizarre day began. A flight attendant was on the plane's intercom, standing right in front of the cockpit door, ranting and raving.
She had said, "I'm the number one in charge," something about 23 years being there, started talking about bankruptcy, but it really got everyone's attention when she said, "There's a problem, we have to go back to the gate," and she said, "I'm not responsible for this plane crashing," and that's when everybody started freaking out.
Most of us were looking at each other, trying to understand what was going on. She just continued to say things over and over on the PA.
Mindful of 9/11, passengers decided to take matters into their own hands. It's all caught on tape.
They're physically restraining the flight attendant as we speak. She's talking about crashing the plane.
Somebody go help.
At least we're not off the ground,
She was putting up a pretty good fight because there was low activity for a bit.
That's when the screaming started.
She was just screaming, just blood-curdling screams. So it was sad. It was very sad. That's when the girl behind me called 911. And finally she got 911 on the phone and convinced them I am on the plane and this plane needs to stop.
I ran up to the front of the plane to assist.
Brad LeClaire was one of the passengers who raced into action.
There were two gentlemen already restraining her, one holding each arm, and I just tried to calm her down. She mentioned she was bipolar, and she began speaking about the events of 9/11. She was very strong, in a manic state. Adrenaline was pumping, so she was trying to get away, and she was almost successful. I told her to go back to her training. I said, "What was the first thing you learned about being a flight attendant?" And she said something. I said, "No, remain what?" And she said, "Calm." I said, "So let's remain calm."
LeClaire said the attendant made one more chilling statement before the police arrived and put her in handcuffs.
And towards the end of this whole struggle, she did say, "I'm going to kill them all."
The struggle continued as police tried to take her away for psychiatric evaluation.
And then you can see this whole crowd of people starting there. They're carrying her across into the car.
When it was over, passengers were relieved, and many were thankful that the incident did not happen in flight.
Had she done this in the air, it would have been a whole different story.
Especially given the access and freedom flight attendants have to move about the plane.
You absolutely want to identify any event on the ground and deal with it as opposed to having to deal with it subsequently up in the air. When you're thousands of feet in the air, it literally is a pressurized cabin.
The irony of it all is that in many cases, the flight attendants are the first line of defense.
Today is really an unfortunate event because flight attendants are first responders, and that was opposite case today, that there were others that had to respond to this flight attendant who was obviously in need of help.
Tonight, no charges have been filed. So far, police see this as a case of a troubled woman, more so than a crime. American Airlines emphasized that travelers were never in danger and that the passengers, while delayed, did eventually make it to Chicago, albeit a bit shaken.
I will never get that sound of her screaming out of my head.
For Nightline, I'm Pierre Thomas in Washington.